Good evening, my friend. Settle in. Let the weight of the day slip from your shoulders. Tonight we begin a journey into one of the most important questions any human can ask. What makes life truly worth living? Not just surviving, not just achieving, but living well. This is the central mystery at the heart of The Good Life by Robert Waldinger and Marc Schulz, a book born from the longest-running scientific study of human happiness. Imagine a quiet office in Boston, Massachusetts, in the late 1930s. A small group of researchers at Harvard University gathers, not to study disease or economics, but something far more elusive: human flourishing. They decide to track the lives of more than 700 young men, year after year, for decades. They will record their joys and failures, their triumphs and breakdowns, their loves and their losses. None of the men knew, as they sat for their first interviews, that their stories would become the backbone of a study stretching across generations and nearly a century. What those researchers were really chasing was not statistics or sterile data. They wanted to answer the question that haunts every person who lies awake at night. What does it mean to live a good life? The authors invite you to step into this story not as a distant observer, but as a fellow traveler. You are not merely reading about them. You are walking beside them, through dormitory hallways and factory floors, across battlefields and into kitchens filled with the aroma of family dinners. You hear the scratch of a fountain pen as a young man writes letters home from World War II. You hear the laughter of friends playing cards in a cramped apartment in Boston's North End. You feel the weight of responsibility as a new father cradles his infant for the first time, wondering if he will be the man his child deserves. The study's participants began as boys filled with ambition. Some dreamed of becoming doctors, lawyers, or politicians. Others simply wanted steady jobs to support their families. Many of them would see their lives veer in directions they never anticipated. Some rose to prominence, achieving fame and fortune. Others wrestled with addiction, depression, or poverty. Some married once and stayed married for decades, while others loved and lost again and again. As you follow their stories, you start to notice something. The researchers certainly did. It wasn't the men with the highest salaries who ended their days most content. It wasn't the ones with the most awards or the most impressive resumes. Nor was it the men who avoided hardship altogether. In fact, many of the happiest men endured tragedy and loss. So what separated them? What sustained them through decades of war, upheaval, and aging? What helped them live not just longer, but better? The book answers with clarity. It is the strength of our connections, the warmth of our relationships, the simple but profound act of being known, understood, and cared for. Happiness, the study reveals, is less about wealth or success than it is about love, friendship, and community. But we won't stop at the conclusion. Tonight, we'll trace the lives of those men, listen to their hopes and mistakes, and watch the patterns unfold. Along the way, you'll be invited to reflect on your own life, to ask yourself, who shows up when I call? Whose laughter fills my rooms? Where does my heart feel most at peace? If you find this summary helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to BookSnap, and comment below the title of the book you'd like us to summarize next. We'll make it happen soon. And so, as the night settles deeper around us, let's begin walking this long road of human experience together, guided by the voices of hundreds of lives across 8 decades, in search of the simple but profound secret of the good life. The study began in 2 very different corners of Boston. On one side of the city, in the grand halls of Harvard College during the late 1930s, a group of young men, most from wealthy or well-established families, were invited to participate in what was then an unusual scientific experiment. They were privileged, well-dressed, confident, and often destined for leadership in law, medicine, politics, or business. Their futures seemed bright, their paths well-lit, their families expecting them to become the stewards of society. Across town, however, another group of boys was chosen. These were teenagers from some of Boston's most struggling neighborhoods, children of immigrant families who often lived in cramped apartments without reliable heat, plumbing, or even regular meals. Some had fathers who had lost their jobs in the Great Depression. Others faced violence at home or the weight of caring for younger siblings when parents could not. For them, the future was uncertain, the climb steep, the odds stacked against them. Together, these two groups, Harvard sophomores and Boston's disadvantaged youth, became the foundation of what is now known as the Harvard Study of Adult Development. Year after year, researchers visited their homes, interviewed them about their joys and failures, tested their health, and recorded their stories. They asked about their work, their relationships, their habits, their triumphs, and their regrets. What began as an ambitious academic project to track human flourishing grew into a treasure trove of data spanning generations. Picture a researcher sitting across from a young man in 1939. The student, dressed in a crisp blazer, describes dreams of becoming a lawyer or senator. Meanwhile, a boy from the other neighborhood, shoulders hunched from laboring jobs since he was 12, says he just wants to escape poverty. Their lives could not look more different. Yet both are asked the same questions. How do you see your future? What do you hope will make you happy? As the decades passed, the stories unfolded in unexpected ways. Some of the Harvard men, despite their privileged starts, ended up struggling with alcoholism or broken marriages. Some of the poor boys rose to prominence, becoming successful businessmen, teachers, or even government leaders. The study revealed that where a person began was not destiny. Circumstances mattered, but they were not the final word. This contrast becomes the first great lesson of the good life. Happiness cannot be reduced to income, status, or the circumstances of our birth. What matters more is how we navigate those circumstances, how we love and are loved, and how we connect with others. As you listen to the accounts of these men, both the privileged and the struggling, you begin to see your own life in their stories. Perhaps you recognize the pressure of expectation, the weight of wanting to prove yourself, or the silent fear of not measuring up. Perhaps you understand the hunger for stability, the dream of building a life beyond the shadow of scarcity. The study reminds us that no one's path is guaranteed. A gilded childhood does not protect against loneliness, and a difficult beginning does not condemn anyone to a life of despair. The good life, as the research would reveal again and again, is shaped less by what you are given at the start and more by the quality of the relationships you build along the way. And so, from two separate paths, one lined with privilege, the other with hardship, the stories merge into a single question that we now carry forward. If happiness isn't found in wealth, fame, or perfect circumstances, then where exactly does it reside? The world has always whispered the same promise. If you earn enough, if you climb high enough, if your name shines bright enough, you will finally be happy. For many of the young men in the Harvard study, this belief was the air they breathed. They dreamed of corner offices, marble floors, and society pages with their names in print. Some chased political power, imagining applause that would never end. Others pictured fortunes vast enough to guarantee safety from the uncertainties of life. Decade by decade, the researchers watched these dreams play out. They saw the glitter of early success, the man who seemed destined to be president, shaking hands and speaking with a magnetic charm, the ambitious entrepreneur who built a fortune before middle age, the doctor who earned acclaim in the finest hospitals of the nation. On paper, these men had it all. Their resumes were impeccable. Their photographs graced magazines. Their bank accounts overflowed. And yet, behind the carefully painted portraits, another story unfolded. Some of the most outwardly successful were deeply lonely. A few drowned in alcohol, using it to silence the gnawing emptiness that no award could quiet. Others confessed, late at night to interviewers, that their marriages had become hollow, that their children felt more like strangers than companions, that the applause of the world was fading, but the silence at home was deafening. The study's records are filled with stark contrasts. One man, who achieved celebrity status in his 20s, found himself disillusioned by middle age, estranged from his family, and restless despite wealth. Another, who began life in poverty, working menial jobs to support his parents, eventually built a modest business, married, and filled his home with laughter. By his 70s, he was one of the happiest and healthiest participants in the entire study. The researchers learned an uncomfortable truth. Money and fame can open doors, but they rarely open hearts. Beyond a certain point, once basic needs are met, the correlation between wealth and happiness flatlines. A larger paycheck may bring new conveniences, but it cannot mend loneliness, cannot soothe a broken marriage, cannot offer the deep sense of belonging that humans crave. This realization forces you to pause. How often have you whispered to yourself, "If only I had more money, things would be different"? How often have you scrolled through the polished lives of others, imagining that their success has unlocked a secret happiness you cannot touch? The study suggests otherwise. Those external prizes glitter, but they do not glow from within. The good life is not hidden in the applause of strangers, nor in the accumulation of things. It lies elsewhere, waiting for us in places less obvious, but far more enduring. And as we follow the lives of these men through the storms of midlife, we begin to see where the true treasure is buried. Close your eyes and picture yourself at a long wooden table. The air hums with voices, laughter, and the gentle clink of glasses. Around you sit people who know you, not just your name, but your fears, your quirks, the stories that still make you laugh years later. This is the heartbeat of the good life. Relationships. The Harvard study reached its most striking conclusion not through statistics on wealth or job titles, but through decades of evidence that the strength of a person's relationships is the single most powerful predictor of happiness and health. Not just romantic love, not just family, but the whole constellation of connections. Friends, siblings, colleagues, neighbors. People who felt more connected to others lived longer, healthier, more fulfilling lives. Those who felt isolated, no matter their status or fortune, withered sooner. The stories prove it. One man, raised in privilege, grew into a respected doctor. His practice thrived, his bank account swelled, but his marriage fell apart. By his 50s, he admitted to the researchers that despite his success, he felt hollow and alone. His health began to falter, and his later years were shadowed by bitterness. In contrast, another man from the struggling Boston neighborhoods never escaped modest means. He worked as a factory foreman, raised children on a tight budget, and rarely traveled. But his evenings were filled with card games among friends, laughter with neighbors on the stoop, and Sunday dinners with family. At 80, when asked to reflect on his life, he leaned back with a smile and said, "I'm the luckiest man alive." His medical charts agreed. He was physically healthier than men 20 years younger. Relationships, the study found, act like a buffer against life's inevitable storms. When illness strikes, when careers falter, when dreams collapse, those who are surrounded by people they can rely on recover faster, cope better, and often find meaning in the very struggles that might have broken others. Social isolation, by contrast, is as harmful to health as smoking or obesity. Loneliness eats away at both body and soul. Think of your own life. When you are hurt, who do you call? When you have good news, who is the first person you want to share it with? These connections are not extras. They are the foundation stones. The men who invested in relationships, who nurtured marriages, friendships, and community ties, were not only happier, they were physically healthier. Their brains stayed sharper, their hearts stronger. They aged more gracefully because love itself had become their shield. The good life, then, is not about chasing the applause of the world. It is about having a hand to hold when the lights grow dim, about hearing your name spoken with warmth, about being woven into a web of connection that holds even when life frays at the edges. As the study's files grow thick with letters, interviews, and health records, one truth emerges like a melody playing beneath the noise. To be truly happy, to be truly well, You need people to walk beside you. And, just as important, you must be willing to walk beside them. You stand at the doorway of a modest home on a quiet street. Inside, two people sit across from each other at the kitchen table. Their hair is grayer now, their hands a little shakier, but the way they look at each other carries decades of shared history. This is the long arc of love, stretching across time, bending through hardship, and revealing itself not in grand gestures, but in the daily rhythm of care. The Harvard study found that romantic relationships, especially marriages, were crucibles where happiness could either deepen or collapse. Couples who built habits of warmth, respect, and forgiveness often grew closer as years passed. They were not spared from arguments or disappointment. Far from it. They fought about money, about children, about whose turn it was to do the dishes. But what mattered was not the absence of conflict. It was how they returned to each other afterward. Did they nurse grudges, or did they reach out? Did they view disagreements as battles, or as chances to understand one another better? One man, married in the optimism of his 20s, watched his union unravel when life's stresses piled up. His career demanded long hours. He came home drained, offering little more than silence. His wife, lonely and unseen, grew distant. By the time he recognized the distance, the bond had thinned to almost nothing. "I thought success would keep us together," he told the researchers, "but it pushed us apart." Another participant's story unfolded differently. He and his wife endured poverty, illness, and the loss of a child. They admitted they argued often, sometimes fiercely. But they developed rituals of repair. Handwritten notes slipped under the bedroom door, late-night walks to talk things out, small gestures of humor that broke the tension. By their 80s, when interviewed side by side, they laughed about their battles. What endured was not perfection, but a deep reservoir of trust and affection that had been built brick by brick. The researchers discovered that couples who were happiest in their later years weren't the ones who avoided storms, but those who saw storms as weather to be endured together. Being able to count on your partner, to feel secure in their presence even when times were hard, was one of the clearest markers of long-term well-being. This truth is as old as any love story, and yet it feels quietly radical in a culture that idolizes independence and achievement. Love is not a finish line you cross when you say, "I do." It is a daily practice, a commitment renewed again and again in countless small moments. You might pause here and think about your own life. Who is at your table? Whose eyes have met yours across days of joy and nights of struggle? The good life, the study suggests, is not about escaping hardship, but about choosing to hold on to each other through it. And as you continue walking with the men in the study, you begin to see this lesson echo in their friendships as well. Those bonds that, though quieter than romance, often saved lives in unexpected ways. Unexpected ways. Now you step into a neighborhood park on a summer evening. Children chase each other in circles, their voices carrying into the dusk. On a worn bench, two men in their 60s sit side by side, sharing a sandwich and a story. They are not related, not bound by blood or law, yet they lean toward each other with an ease that only decades of friendship can create. The Harvard study found something remarkable. Friendships are not simply pleasant extras in life, they are lifelines. In the long arc of 70, 80 years, it wasn't just marriages or careers that determined happiness. It was whether a person could count on friends, people they could call when the world felt heavy, people who laughed with them when nothing seemed funny, people who walked into their lives when everyone else walked out. One man from the Harvard group had achieved everything he once dreamed of: a high-powered job, influence, and a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But when the researchers asked who he could call at 2 in the morning if he were sick or afraid, he sat in silence. His wealth couldn't pick up the phone. His colleagues were more competitors than confidants. Despite all his success, he reported feeling adrift. Another man, from a working-class neighborhood, never made more than a modest salary. He was a postal clerk most of his life, living in a small home filled with mismatched furniture. But every Saturday, he hosted a card game. Friends crowded around his kitchen table, joking, swapping stories, passing around sandwiches and beers. His laugh was loud, his friendship steady. When he reached his 80s, his body was aging, but his heart, both literally and figuratively, was strong. The study found that people with strong social ties had lower levels of stress hormones, better immune systems, and even less decline in memory as they aged. Loneliness, on the other hand, was toxic. Those who lived in isolation often saw their health unravel faster, their minds clouded sooner, their lives cut short. Relationships, it turns out, are not just about companionship. They are medicine. They cushion the hard edges of life and give us resilience when pain comes. They also add joy to the ordinary. The walk shared with a neighbor, the friend who remembers your birthday, the companion who knows how you take your coffee without asking. These moments of connection, repeated thousands of times, stitch together a life that feels meaningful. As you listen to these stories, you may find yourself scanning your own life. Who are the friends who make you laugh until you can't breathe? Who is the person who texts you back no matter the hour? The study's findings are simple but profound. Cultivating friendships, tending to them with care, is not optional if you want to live a full, healthy life. And so the journey continues. From the warmth of friendships, we step into another realm where happiness is tested and defined: our work. Because while relationships sustain the heart, the work we choose shapes how we spend our days, and those days, woven together, become our lives. The men in the study grew up, one by one, and stepped into the arena of work. For some, it meant law firms with marble lobbies and polished mahogany desks. For others, it meant factory floors that smelled of oil and steel, or classrooms filled with chalk dust and restless children. Whatever form it took, work consumed more of their waking hours than almost anything else, and so the researchers paid close attention. At first, most participants judged their careers by the same yardstick society often does: salary, titles, prestige. They wanted to be known, to be important, to climb ladders quickly. And some of them did. One man became a celebrated CEO. Another landed in politics and basked in the glow of public recognition. Yet, as the decades passed, cracks began to show. The CEO confessed to feeling estranged from his family, having spent years at the office while his children grew up without him. The politician, after leaving office, felt a deep emptiness, as though the applause had vanished and left him alone with silence. But other stories revealed a different kind of wealth. One participant, who had turned down a lucrative corporate job, became a high school teacher. His salary never soared, but his classroom was alive with curiosity, and former students often returned years later to thank him. When researchers asked about his happiness, his face lit up as he spoke of the lives he had touched. Another man, a carpenter, took pride in building homes that would outlast him. "When I walk past a house I built 30 years ago," he said, "I feel like a part of me is still standing there." The study showed that meaning in work matters more than money. People who felt their daily labor connected them to something larger than themselves, whether that was educating children, healing the sick, or simply providing stability for a family, reported higher levels of fulfillment, even if their incomes were modest. In contrast, those who pursued status alone often found their satisfaction fading quickly. The applause of the world, once so loud, always quieted. Work also shaped social networks. Men who formed friendships at the office, who collaborated rather than competed, carried those connections into retirement. Others who treated work only as a battlefield or a stepping stone often found themselves isolated once the career ended. The job may end, but the relationships it fosters can endure. As you think about your own days, the emails, the deadlines, the endless tasks, it is worth asking, does your work nourish you, or does it drain you? Does it connect you to others, or does it leave you stranded, clutching only titles and paychecks that cannot love you back? In the stories of these men, the pattern is clear. The good life is not about what you do for work, but about whether your work allows you to love, to connect, and to live with purpose. And just as meaningful work strengthens the spirit, the way we treat our bodies shapes the vessel that carries us through all these years. That is where the study next turns its gaze, toward health, habits, and the long story our bodies tell. The researchers kept more than letters and interviews. They gathered blood samples, measured cholesterol, recorded blood pressure, scanned brains, and tracked medical records across lifetimes. For decades, they watched how the body tells its own story, sometimes long before the person even notices. What they found is that happiness is not only a feeling in the mind, it is written in the body. Imagine one participant in his 50s, confident he was healthy because his career was thriving. He worked late, fueled by coffee and adrenaline, brushing off headaches and sleepless nights as the price of ambition. But his medical charts told another tale. High blood pressure creeping higher each year, arteries stiffening, the quiet march of stress through his veins. By the time he slowed down, much of the damage had been done. Then there was another man. Not wealthy, not famous, but someone who took a daily walk no matter the weather. Neighbors remember seeing him strolling through the snow with a wool cap pulled low, or pedaling an old bicycle up the hill in summer. He ate simple meals, cooked at home, and never smoked. By his 80s, he was still trimming his own hedges, his laughter booming, his memory sharp enough to recall stories from 50 years before. The study revealed that caring for the body and nurturing close relationships reinforce each other. Those who felt loved and supported were more likely to take better care of themselves. They exercised more, ate better, visited the doctor when something was wrong. And those with healthier bodies, in turn, had more energy to invest in friendships, family, and community. The researchers even found that relationships could predict physical health more reliably than cholesterol levels. People who felt lonely showed earlier signs of mental decline. Their bodies carried more inflammation, their sleep was more restless, and their immune systems less resilient. Loneliness, they discovered, was not just an emotional ache. It was a slow erosion of the body itself. Think of it this way. Your body is like a house. Food and exercise are the bricks and beams that keep it standing, but relationships are the warmth inside. A house can be solidly built, but without warmth, it feels empty. Conversely, warmth alone cannot hold up crumbling walls. The good life requires both. As you picture the men in the study entering their 70s and 80s, you see this truth. Those who had nurtured love and care often walked with steady steps and clear eyes, even when arthritis stiffened their joints. Those who had neglected their bodies, or who had no one to lean on, found themselves confined, both physically and emotionally. So the study teaches a simple lesson. Take care of your health not for vanity, not for appearances, but because your body is the vessel that carries you toward the connections that matter. Exercise becomes less about sculpting muscles and more about ensuring you can still walk alongside a friend, lift a grandchild, or dance in your living room when the music comes on. And as the participants continued to age, another challenge awaited them. One no one can avoid. Loss, change, and the shifting seasons of life would test the very foundations of happiness. The question would become, when everything you've built begins to change, what remains to hold you steady? The study's archive holds thousands of pages of interviews where men, now older and slower, spoke about the hardest storms of their lives. Wars had scattered some of them across the globe. Others had endured the sudden loss of a spouse, the quiet ache of a child who no longer called, or the erosion of their own health. In every story, hardship arrived, sometimes like a thunderclap, sometimes like a slow and steady rain. One man, once a promising athlete, lost his leg in World War II. For years afterward, he drowned in bitterness, replaying what could have been. But later in life, he married, joined a church choir, and found purpose in teaching music to children. His health improved as his spirit lifted, and the study noted how his social connections became a shield against despair. Another participant never fully adapted. When his business collapsed during a financial downturn, he withdrew into himself. He avoided friends, avoided family gatherings, refused invitations. His health declined rapidly, and by his 60s, he was plagued by chronic illness. The researchers could almost trace the lines of loneliness on his medical charts. What emerged from these stories was not a denial of suffering. Pain, loss, and uncertainty were constants. What mattered was flexibility, the ability to bend without breaking. The happiest participants weren't those who avoided grief, but those who allowed themselves to feel it, to share it, and then to keep moving forward. They adapted when careers ended. They found new ways to connect when old friendships faded. They learned, sometimes painfully, that love and meaning can be rebuilt, even after everything has fallen apart. The study showed that people who clung rigidly to old identities, the athlete who couldn't accept life without the game, the executive who couldn't bear retirement, suffered more deeply. Those who could reframe their lives, who said, "This is not the end, it's the beginning of something else," often found unexpected joy. You can feel the truth of this in your own life. Think of the losses you've endured, the jobs that slipped away, the friendships that faded, the dreams that dissolved. Did they leave scars? Of course. But maybe they also opened space for something new. Maybe the very act of surviving taught you resilience, the kind that strengthens the heart like a muscle. The good life, the researchers concluded, is not a straight line. It is not a flawless arc from youth to old age. It is a winding path, with detours and storms, with seasons of grief and seasons of renewal. What makes the difference is not whether the storm comes, it always does, but whether you have a hand to hold, a voice to reassure you, a community to catch you when you stumble. And as we follow these men into their final chapters, we begin to see the ultimate lesson, that the good life is less about what you achieve or what you endure, and more about what you choose to nurture when the years grow short. Picture this. You're sitting in a quiet living room, late afternoon light spilling through the curtains. Across from you is a man in his 90s. His hands tremble as he flips through a worn leather photo album. The pages are yellowed, the corners curled, but his eyes shine when they land on the faces. Children laughing on a summer lawn, friends raising glasses at weddings, a partner smiling across a kitchen table. He doesn't talk about the houses he owned, the titles he collected, or the money he made. He just says, softly but firmly, "I wasn't always happy, but I was never alone." That single line captures the heart of the Harvard Studies lesson. Good relationships aren't just nice to have. They are the foundation of a long, meaningful, healthy life. People who invested in trust, affection, and genuine connection lived longer, their bodies aging more gently, their minds staying clearer. When life threw storms at them, they bent but did not break, because they had someone to hold on to. And then there were the others. Men who chased status and fortune but neglected the people around them. Men who withdrew into loneliness when careers ended or marriages fractured. Their charts told a different story. Earlier illness, sharper decline, a quiet erosion of spirit. The absence of connection took a toll as heavy as smoking or chronic disease. Here's the liberating truth. You don't need millions in the bank or a perfect resume to live well. You don't need to outrun pain or dodge every storm. The good life is built, slowly, in the everyday choices you make. To call a friend instead of scrolling in silence. To forgive instead of hardening your heart. To reach out when you'd rather retreat. Each small act of love and presence stitches another thread into the fabric of a life that holds together when the years turn heavy. So, what remains when the applause fades? When the titles lose their shine? When age bends your body and slows your steps? If you have people you can count on, people who will show up when the world feels dark, then you already hold the answer. The good life isn't waiting for you at some distant finish line. It's here, in the warmth of connection, in the voices that know your name, in the love you give and allow yourself to receive. As the night closes in, let that truth sink deeper. Breathe. Rest. You are already walking the path of the good life. One relationship, one moment of presence, one heartbeat at a time, beat at a time, beat at a time.